Hey, I'm Joe with RevZilla, and welcome to our series on how to remove wheels from different types of motorcycles. Today, we're talking about sport bikes. So there's a few different reasons you want to remove the wheels from your bike. You could need to change your rear sprocket, your brake rotors, your wheel bearings, but most commonly it's going to be to change your tires. So most motorcycle shops will charge you less if you just bring them the wheels to have new tires mounted and balanced versus the entire bike. Also, Cycle Gear stores offer discounted tire mounting and balancing service if you had bought the tires from RevZilla, Cycle Gear, or any of their partners, but they don't have any ways to remove wheels from bikes, so you'll need to just bring them the wheels yourself. So before you get started, you're going to need some tools. So you'll need some large diameter sockets and wrenches, some Allen wrenches, some axle grease, and some rags. And for most modern sport bikes, you're going to need an axle tool like this one from Motion Pro. This has 4 of the most common metric sizes that you'll find on the front axle of most modern sport bikes. But what's cool about this tool is that it fits a wide variety of different kinds of motorcycles as well. You'll find these on sport touring bikes, adventure bikes, and some modern dirt bikes. So this tool in particular works on a few of my own bikes, so it's really a useful investment. So just remember that this is just a general guide. You'll need to refer to your service manual for the specific instructions on how to remove the wheels from your bike in particular. So the first step of our guide is how to lift the motorcycle. So first you'll need to find a safe, flat location to work on your bike. You want the bike to be secure and stable while it's up in the air without wheels on it. And then next you'll want to loosen the axles. Typically, I like to loosen the axle nuts while the bike's on the ground because it's a little bit more stable than when it's up in the air. So then after that, you'll find that there's a variety of different stands available for different types of motorcycles, so you'll need to select the type of stands that work best for your type of motorcycle. But most commonly, you're going to find set up like this: a rear swing arm spool stand and then a forklift stand. So if you don't know what swing arm spools are, they are basically just little knobs that thread into your rear swing arm that give a great mounting point for the spool stand to lift the bike from. And they also offer some protection to your swing arm and your rear axle as well. So if you don't already have a set, there's a chance that your bike probably has provisions for them. So just go to RevZilla.com and enter your bike's info into the bike finder, and under bike protection, you'll find a variety of swing arm spools. Usually they're only around 20 bucks, so it's really a worthwhile investment that makes this job a hell of a lot easier. And for the front, we have a forklift stand. So this forklift stand actually grabs the bike from the bottom of the fork legs to lift it up. But traditionally you'll find that these stands tend to block the pinch bolts for the front axle, so that's why I like to loosen them up before I put the bike up on the stands. So another option for lifting the front of a sport bike is a headlift stand. It raises the bike by the bottom of the steering stem versus the bottom of the fork legs. So how this works is that you'll slip this stand up underneath the front of your fairing, and this pin will go into the bottom of the steering stem in your triple clamp. So what's cool about this is it doesn't only allow you to remove your front wheel, it also allows you to remove the fork legs from the triple clamps. This is advantageous if you'd like to service your own suspension, or you're going to have your suspension serviced by someone maybe preparing your bike for track use. One thing to note is that different motorcycles use different diameter steering stems, so when you do get a headlift stand, you need to be sure that you select the appropriate size pin that goes with your bike. So for you sport bike owners out there that have single-sided swing arms on your bikes, obviously the spooled stand isn't going to do the trick. So that's why we have the one-arm stand by Pitbull. This is a really cool option for you single-sided swing arm owners out there because you could get this stand with a variety of different diameter pins that fit the different diameter axles on those bikes. So next up, we're going to dive into loosening the axles. So now that we have our bike up in the air, it's time to start pulling the axles out so we can get the wheels off. A couple quick tips before we get into that section though. With sport bikes, generally they have giant front brakes, and usually 2 of them. So that makes it impossible to get the front wheel off without removing the front calipers first. So make sure you have the tools to take your calipers off before you try to pull the front axle out. And with the rear wheel, generally you're going to have to deal with the drive chain, of course. But what I like to do with the rear axle in particular is when you go to loosen the axle nut, I just generally leave it on by the last few threads, and then I could hit the axle nut with the dead blow mallet or a rubber mallet. And what that does by hitting the axle nut instead of the end of the axle, it protects the threads. You don't want to mangle up those threads so that it makes it impossible to put the nut on later on, so be careful at that step. Generally, once you knock the axle free, it makes it really easy to slide it out. Now at this step, you don't want to go tearing the axle out, super quick and have your wheel spacers go flying across the shop. You want to take your time at this point. As you pull the axle out, each part will become free from the motorcycle. And what I like to do is lay a rag out on the floor, and as you pull each part free from the motorcycle, lay it down in the order that it is on the bike. That makes it a lot easier when you go to put the parts back together later on. Now, understanding that you might have to have the bike apart for a couple days if you're taking your wheels to a shop to get your tires mounted and balanced, you don't want to have your parts laying around on the floor for a few days. So just take a picture with your phone of everything before you pick it up and put it away. That'll make it a lot easier to lay back out when you get your wheels back from the shop. Ultimately, you want to refer to your shop manual for all the information that's specific to your machine. So now that you have your new tires or parts installed on your wheels, you could reinstall the wheels on the bike in the reverse order. But a couple quick tips about reinstallation. I like to be sure that I clean and re-grease the axles before I put them back into the bike. If you don't re-grease the axles, there's a good chance that they could seize to the wheel spacers, making it impossible to get them out later on. So it's always a good idea to use plenty of grease when you put the axles back in. Also, when you're tightening the axle nuts, it's a good idea to just tighten them by hand while the bike is still up on the stance and then torque them to factory spec when they're back on the ground. You don't want to put a ton of leverage into an axle nut while the bike is up on stance. It's much more secure down on the ground. Also, you had your brakes off, so you want to be sure that you reinstall your brake calipers and tighten those bolts to factory specs. Another thing regarding brakes is that you probably had pushed the pads into the calipers a little bit, so you'll need to pump those back up to make sure you have full braking power when you go out for a ride. Always check your brakes before you go out for a ride after you work on your bike. And then now's a good time to check your chain tension. When you go to put your rear wheel back on, it's a good idea to double check the chain slack per your manual to be sure that your chain slack is set to factory specs. And lastly, and most importantly, be careful on new tires, especially sport bike tires. They can be really slick when you first put them on. So my rule of thumb is I like to burn 1 tank of gas through the bike before I really start to rail on new sport bike tires. So just be mindful that when you put a new set of sport bike tires on, don't go hammering that first corner right out of the gate because you'll probably go down. Take it easy on them until they're scrubbed in. So hopefully now you have all the information you need so you could remove your own wheels and reinstall them on your own sport bike. If you're interested in finding out how to do this to other styles of motorcycles, check out my other videos where I cover adventure bikes, dirt bikes, and cruisers. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to one of our gear geeks at 877-792-9455 or shoot an email over to cs@revzilla.com. I'm Joe, and I'll see you next time.